Hey guys, thank you for joining us again today. We are in the book of Job on our This is the Bible series. And today I have with me Mr. Joseph Barcelo is in studio today.
Correct pronunciation, my man.
Boom, first try. So yeah, we're diving into chapter 20. And if you haven't had a chance to read up to where we are, definitely go back. It is a lot of reading, but well worth it. So just a super fast catching up. Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Zophar, and Bildad, they've already gone through and giving one round of speeches, and Job has responded. We are on round two. So Eliphaz has already spoken, Bildad has spoken, and now it's Zophar's turn. And so this is where we pick up is Zophar is addressing Job. And one thing that I wanted to bring out that just at this point, dude, it's almost comical. It's just the way that they are piling on Job. It's almost like you have to laugh so you won't cry type thing. But one thing that I saw in verse 2, Zophar says this: "Therefore my thoughts answer me because of my haste within me." And so he's basically saying, Job, I've listened to Eliphaz and Bildad. I've heard your responses. I've chewed on it. I've thought about it. And now I'm going to respond. And there's a part of me that says maybe there was a 1% fleck of hope within Job that said, all right, he's listened. He's going to give me a good, honest, I heard from the Lord response. And when you look at chapter 20, it is broken down into three sections. Section 1, the wicked will perish forever. Section 2, the wicked will experience God's wrath. Section 3, the wicked will be destroyed. So wow. He goes through chapter 20 and he's like, brother, if you thought Eliphaz and Bildad had something for you, let me just go ahead and take the lid all the way off and pour this wrath out. And so, man, Job has had to sit there and just endure. Absolutely endure. What are some things that you've seen from chapter 20?
Man, I think that's really interesting that you found his response in a sense hopeless and so without the guidance of God, because as soon as I encountered his response, I actually felt slightly comforted by it, which is a strange thing to think because he's approaching it through a system of works. Achieving a proper status from the audience of God through the efforts of seeing himself, I guess, associated with a moral lens. And I think when you come from religious backgrounds, you could find yourself trying to systematically approach God to please him and to avoid this extent of his encounter, which he's experiencing currently, which is suffering. So I found it slightly comforting.
There's one thing that you said there that I made a note right here. You said, and I love that, how if you come from a religious background, almost without consciously thinking about it, you systematically have a way that you approach God. And I see in verse 4, Zophar says, "Do you not know this from old, since man was placed on the earth?" So the things that he's getting ready to go through, he basically says, Job, everybody knows this. Do you not know this from what you've been taught? Everybody knows this. And so he's, basically saying, we all know this to be true, but it's because he has a system of thought that he puts together. But I also see in his response, it's really easy to win an argument and to prove a point when you are building on your very own false pretense. And he kind of has that, like, Job, everybody knows that this is how God treats the wicked, and you are wicked.
Yes.
And he's building an incredible case. It's just that Job isn't wicked. Like, he doesn't fall into this category. And so, and he gets pretty tough with Job. Even in verse 7 says, you're going to perish just like your feces perishes. My brother.
I know.
Do we have to go?
I know.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of an interesting idea because for me, I saw this a close association with the original temptation in the garden. I have no idea how they're correlated, but I saw this kind of temptation And Swagger presented that he had a flippant style of confidence like Satan did. If you will just eat of this fruit, then you will become like God. And I think he has a proper prescription to achieving a moral status.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's any compassion in it. And I don't think there is a link of human morality to bridge the gap between frailty and transcendence.
Yeah, dude, you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head when you talked about there doesn't seem to be any compassion at all with this. And you keep reading down, and this is something that we saw that happened with Bildad, and Zophar repeats it. He says in verse 10, his children will seek favor of the poor. Like he takes a shot at his kids that are gone. Yeah. And but what's interesting here, and I started to really kind of go another route when I started reading this. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, all three of them, they say something very similar as, you know, they're coming from a place of experience, coming from a place of this is how things have always been. This is how God has judged the wicked. This is how he'll judge you. So he says right here, people that are in your position, Job, their children end up trying to seek favor from poor people like that. That's how lowly they are. But Job's children aren't in that position. They're passed away. And so it's a case of, you know, he's not even being true to his own insights. He's not even, you know, lining up with the things that he believes. And I made this little note here. Just the way that he keeps piling on, and it goes a little bit different direction, but just so kind of hang with me here. He's ruthless, dude. There's, like you said, zero compassion. He's bringing up his children. Like there's just a lot of things going on. Two instances that just jumped into my mind. In John chapter 5, the majority of that story is Jesus healing a man that was lame. He couldn't make it to the pool when the angel stirred the water, so they brought him to Christ, and Jesus heals him. And in John 5:14, after he heals him, he says this. He meets up with the guy and he says, "Go your way and sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." Mm-hmm. All right. So he doesn't dive into what that is. That you can try to draw speculation from that, but he didn't say it frivolously. Evidently, there was something there. Jesus knew his heart, and he was just like, "Hey, go your way and sin no more." We don't want anything. We don't want something bad to happen. But in Luke 15, prodigal son. We're fairly familiar with that story. The son, he gets all of his inheritance. He wastes it. He just, blows it all. And then when he comes back, he is expecting just to be hired as a worker for his dad, and he rehearses what he's going to say. "Father, I've sinned against heaven. I've sinned against you. Make me as one of your hired servants," things like that. But in verses 21 and 22, he says that, "Lord, Father, I've sinned against heaven. I've sinned against you." The father's immediate response was, "Bring the best robe, put it on him." So where am I going with all of that? You see two different examples of, in one story, Jesus heals a lame man, and he kind of gives him some warning. Hey man, don't go back, don't go to a lifestyle of sin because it has consequences. Sin has consequences. So don't go to a lifestyle of sin. In Luke 15, you don't see in that story you don't see any verbal correction. It's just compassion and embracing that prodigal son back. And I put these two things down. Knowledge is knowing what to say, but wisdom is knowing whether you need to say it or not. You know what I mean? And That's good. Sometimes there are situations where I think myself and just people that we're involved with, we need to be told why we are in the pit. We need to be told why. But then there are other times where the consequences of the pit is the only thing that needs to be said. You know what I mean? Yes. And so in John 5, the lame man, he needed a little lesson there. Go your way, sin no more. But in Luke 15, when the prodigal son comes back, you don't see any correction there, because what I feel like is the father goes, you know what? If wasting all of your inheritance on riotous living and being in the pig pen and looking like you look and smelling like you smell and doing what you've done, if that isn't enough to teach you, I doubt my words are going to add anything else. Like that, the pit has been lesson enough. And we don't see that with Job's friends. Like they see his physical condition. They see his material condition. From his responses, they're hearing his emotional and spiritual responses. And instead of just sitting there going, you know what, brother, it's probably, we did pretty good when we sat in silence. Maybe we need to go back to silence, because there is zero compassion when they're responding to him.
I really like that a lot. There's this human tendency that all of us have to be able to define and truly understand the reason for suffering. There have been many books, many talks, many dialogues about the origin of suffering in general. And I have a experience with this. It's completely anecdotal, but my mom had cancer a few years back, and I remember her sitting in the hospital bed, and I was heavy into philosophy at this moment. And I remember staring at her and feeling completely helpless because I had nothing to offer her. Now, of course, there's ways I could have explained the ideology of suffering and how to do it properly with courage, but she wanted none of that at that moment. And I remember very clearly the Spirit spoke to my heart, and he told me that the tree of knowledge is not the tree of life. And that completely dismantled my understanding of suffering, because humans need, I guess, the intangible touch of God, which is wordless at times.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And just to have that close affiliation with somebody who comes alongside you and carries your burdens with you, like Christ says. We build up all of these ideologies around us, trying to understand the world, trying to carry our own philosophies on our back, and it's toilsome. And Jesus says, come to me if you are heavy laden and burdened. And then he says, learn from me, because my yoke is easy. And there's a freedom in Christ, a freedom to just exist, so without the strenuous tangles of trying to provide answers for somebody.
Yeah, and I like the way that you worded that, and experience that just goes beyond words. That can't be spoken, that you just, that is an aspect of it, that you experience, you feel his presence, if you've been saved any amount of time and you've gone through, suffering and just trials and tribulations, God has met you somewhere in your midnight hour. Yes. And to try to explain to that, it just fails. It just fails to know what it was like when the words on the page became real. I am the friend that sticks closer than a brother. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. Yeah. And so that's, we definitely see that here with Job. Is just, man, he just probably would have been better if the friends would have went back to being quiet and let God be God and let him, intervene on this. Yeah, man, that's the last thing that I put down that I wanted to bring out was, you just see so much. It almost seems like hatred. There's something. I think I even made the note in here. What in the world happened between these three friends, their first response and their second response? Especially you see it with Zophar here, because the first time that Zophar speaks to Job, there's a passage in there where he offers a chance for Job, like he tells Job to repent. He tells him to to call upon the Lord. You don't see that here. It's nothing but judgment. There's nothing there. And when you go back and read Job chapter 2, it says like they came to mourn with him and comfort him. There is no comfort here. Like, what in the world happened? And when I was reading through that and looking over it, some thoughts started to penetrate my own heart. And I was just like, Lord, don't let me be so religious that I can sit here and go, man, I ain't like Job's friends. Like I could be feeling the position of Job's friends to somebody else right now. And so when I read that, I wrote 4 things down that kind of popped in my head. Number 1, what happens in my heart towards an individual that disagrees with me? If there's somebody that we just don't see eye to eye and there's lots of disagreement back and forth, what happens within me? Does it start out the conversation, I'm not trying to bring you to my side. I'm really trying to understand where you're coming from. And And if I feel like that's not happening, does something start to turn in my heart where I go from, I'm really trying to hear you to now I must defeat you type thing. Number 2, Hebrews 12:15 says this, see to it that no root of bitterness springs up in you and causes trouble. And I put down, have I been so bitter towards another person for so long that now I'm believing the false narratives that I tell myself about that person? His 3 friends, I don't know who they're talking to, but you see no proof that Job has done any of these things. Zero proof whatsoever. Like, I think it's Zophar that even tells him the only basically paraphrasing, saying the only reason that you have been able to accumulate the wealth that you did was through dishonest means, and it's all going to come crashing down. There's no proof of that. And so it's like, is there a bitter root inside of me that I may have towards somebody else? And it has sprung up into what I see as a beautiful flower, and I'm protecting it, but it's actually killing everything around it. You know? Number 3, what do I need to or rather, who do I just need to stop listening to? Who do I just need to stop listening to? I've said this so many times. We can swallow the watermelon and spit the seeds out, but the seeds are also watermelon flavored. So if I keep putting myself in these positions where I'm getting this input, whether it's from a person or entertainment or whatever it's from, like I'm eventually going to take on those things. I'm eventually going to start mimicking and acting like those things. You know what I mean? It's like the idea of like, you know, you teach what you know, but you reproduce what you are. Like I'm going to, if I'm around this for so long, like it's going to make me bitter. Like it's going to turn me against whatever is in front of me. And the last thing I put down, am I humble enough to admit that I might be wrong? I wonder if at any time during these speeches did these 3 friends stop and go, maybe Job's right. Maybe Job's right. Evidently, they didn't live side by side because they had to travel to come and see him. So they're not observing his life in and out. So where are all these accusations coming from? Could you be wrong? Could I be wrong? You know what I mean? That's just one thing that I see from Zophar's reaction is, man, I don't know what happened from the first time you spoke to now, but all that compassion has gone, and there's something bitter inside you, brother.
I really like all of those observations that you noted there. You know, it's interesting. The translation for Zophar is crown, and crown quickly reminded me about Samuel, about how the Jews were so anxious to resurrect the king. And he warned them, if you have a king, you will have consequence, because now you are under this dictatorship of somebody else's standards and ideals. And I think that Zophar, in a sense, he was the crown. He was the one who approached Job, and he had his standards and he had his set ideals. And when Job was shattering these ideals because he had nothing to guide himself on, saying, well, Job, so there is evidence of you being wicked.
Sure.
He quickly became offended because standards govern our life.
Yeah.
We approach reality through our ideals and standards. And I think grace is the great, there's a term, it's called the iconoclast, shatters images. And I think grace is the great iconoclast. It completely shatters the standards of approach. So you have Jesus, he approaches the blind man, he heals him one way, and then he approaches another man who is in a similar situation, and he goes a different route, because compassion is unique and it molds to the individual who is suffering.
Yeah. And I love the way that you put that, because I know me, myself, you know, having grown up in church and having just a background of, learning about God and being around teaching and in his presence, is one of the things that I can fall prey to at times is knowing that, God so loved the world, and it's a big vision, but does that translate down to me? Yes, he cares about the world, but does he care about me individually? You know what I mean? And it's almost like you were saying, like it's his love and his mercy and his grace, like it covers all. And when he deals with us, he deals with us individually.
Mm-hmm.
Like he knows how to speak to me. He knows how to speak to you. He knows how to correct. He knows how to, exhort and all of those things. And it's very personal. And that's one thing that, again, kind of tying it back here, you do not see with Job's friends. Because if you go back and look at all three of their responses, a lot of them overlap. A lot of them, they're saying the exact same thing. And it's almost like I'm going to take half of what he said and just kind of pour it back on you. And there's no individual compassion that's given to Job. It's just, man, they're just absolutely blasting this guy.
Yeah,
and it's, again, we said it in an earlier session. We may not see Jesus' name written down in Job 20, but Job 20 screams, we need him. We absolutely need him. He is written all over these pages of, we need a Savior that loves and cares enough to us to pay the penalty for our sin. So, man, thank you coming out for coming out and helping with this today, man. I love your insight and your perspective. It's always just great to hear. So thank you guys for tuning in as well. We want you to stay with us as we continue through the book of Job for the next little bit. Next 2 months we'll be in this. And so we'd love for you to continue to be a part of it. And don't forget, this is the Bible. Every word on every page whispers the name Jesus.